So, Strange World is the latest animated adventure film from Disney. And I guess I'll say this right out of the gate. Like, I mean, this is from like Walt Disney's like CG animation studio, which has done stuff like Frozen and Moana and Big Hero 6. And like, if you like, I mean, like Moana is like one of my favorites of the studio, but like that's like high up there. So Strange World, I think, is one of those films that is probably not going to be as highly regarded now, but over time, I think it's going to have like a better perception because I think a lot of people are going to think this film is just kind of like fine, okay, whatever. It's going to be okay for Thanksgiving, a holiday viewing. But over time, I feel like this film is kind of going to get a little bit more revered. Just because like when I first watched the film, it didn't like it was fine. I kind of like dug it. I smiled here and there, but I kept feeling like I almost kind of like wanted to. I was like waiting for like something bigger to happen, something to like smack me over the head. Maybe perhaps because I'm placing a little bit of like the expectations of like Moana or like the Pixar Disney films over it. But I never quite reached that moment. At the same time, though, I did like where this film went, and more importantly, I think what the film represents in terms of like stuff that I have not seen in a Disney film before. So I do like the fact that this is a very original, fantastical premise. It takes place on this alternative Earth where humanity has all been confined to like this kind of like mountain-locked region. Like no one has explored the rest of the world. It's only been like this very small community in this village called like Avalonia. And the village has done okay for itself. Like it's got like, I'd say probably like maybe about like 19th century technology that it's been mastering and has been getting better at. But they still want to know like what's beyond the mountains. Like no one's ever been outside and to discover the outside world. Well, the one person determined to discover that is Jaeger Clade, who's voiced by Dennis Quaid, who is a famed explorer. He's tackled many mountains, and he wants to discover what's beyond and see if there's more out there and more land and more civilizations to explore. Coming along with him on his adventures is Searcher, voiced by Jake Gyllenhaal, and Searcher is very much like he's like not quite on like the rebellious side, but wants to go a different way in life. Rather than explore what's outside of Avalonia, he wants to improve Avalonia from within. He wants to be a farmer, more or less. Like he eventually discovers that he wants to be a farmer. What he does know is that he doesn't want to be an explorer because he finds it too dangerous, and he feels like he's not living up to his dad's expectations. So very early on in their career, in Searcher's career as an explorer, he parts ways with his father, and his father disappears into the mountains while Searcher goes off and starts a family. And I like the fact that even though you have like that family split right at the beginning of the film, I do love how Searcher's family is a loving family that he develops. Like it's not one of those like chaotic films where it feels like there's an onus that has to be on like either his wife or his son, which some of these Disney films tend to do. They tend to kind of like shift the onus onto like the kid to have a better connection with their parent. And thankfully that isn't the case here. It's still a film about generational divide and how to like, connect, especially with like the father and son dynamic, but it never places it all on one character, which I love. It shows these flaws within all these characters, and that they just need to confront them and come to terms with them to become a more stable family unit. It was especially great to see like Searcher's relationship with his wife Meridian, voiced by Gabrielle Union, and his son Ethan, voiced by Jabuki Young White. And they have a surprisingly stable home life. They get together well, even when Searcher embarrasses his son in front of like his crush. They still get along. There's a very charming moment early on where they're just at home making dinner, and it's just such a wonderful, joyful moment where it's just like you're kind of wincing because you're like, oh man, what horrible fate is gonna befoul them because. This doesn't feel right for a Disney film, because usually if you want to have an adventure, it feels like you have to like you either have to like put the kids in danger or you have to kind of like sweep the parents under the rug. That's why there's always like the dead parent trope of, like Frozen or Bambi, where you've got to like kill off the parents so that the kids can have an adventure, or you put the parents in danger so that the kids have to go off and save them. And it thankfully never becomes that. Like, there is like a daring adventure that happens. Like, Searcher's whole deal is that he's discovered this great resource that basically gives the entire village power for all sorts of like devices, for their cars, for their homes, for electricity, for everything, for these hover vehicles. But the resources are starting to drain, like they're not working as well. And it's because they're all connected to a root system that goes deep beneath their village that they've never explored. So they take this kind of like floating Jules Verne style like ship down into like the center, like the center of the center of the earth. Like I didn't want to say the thing, but I guess I have to. So yeah, so they end up journeying to the center of the earth, and surprise, surprise, when they get down there, there's all sorts of fantastic creatures and a fantastic environment of just like bouncy grounds, and there's like fish that fly through the air, and there's these giant dinosaurs that have spores that come off their back, and tentacle monsters that roll around the area. All these fascinating little sights here. And the film does take its time to appreciate some of this, and I like that we only spend just enough time on this fantastical world that it never feels like it's overwhelming. It always feels like you have a grasp over all the different creatures that are in this environment, and also how to interact with this environment as well. Where it doesn't, like, there's so many sequences where it feels like it could just be lots of busyness happening, and it doesn't feel that way. It always feels like there's a decent flow where even though it's like this weird underground environment, you always feel like you have a sense of place and direction with where these characters are, which is saying something for a film where there's chases on the ground, there's chases through the sky, there's they keep going deeper and deeper into the earth, where they find even more fantastical stuff, and it never feels busy. It always feels like there's a sense of control over where this adventure is going. And of course, they eventually meet up with Jaeger Clade later in the film, and then you have the real meat of this film, which is like the family drama between Jaeger, Searcher, and Ethan, where they all clash about their expectations and their fears. Like, Searcher's whole deal is that he fears that Ethan is going to be like Jaeger, and he can see elements of his father in him, and this kind of like terrifies him. He feels like, I don't want like Ethan to be like my father, but at the same time he realizes, man, I could end up becoming my father if I don't step back and assess what I'm doing here as well. And between all three characters, they all have that moment of kind of like realization where they have to place more trust in each other in order to come together as a family. So as easy as it could be to kind of make Jaeger the easy villain here, it doesn't resort to like that kind of like simplistic nature here. So it was very refreshing to have this film with a very stable family unit that has real issues that they have to contemplate and come together in. Not to mention, there's so many cute moments between them. Like one of the first moments that Searcher, Jaeger, and Ethan bond together is over this little like tabletop card game that they've established in universe, which is actually kind of clever. It's this little like kind of like hexagonal farmer game, which is actually pretty neat. That I'd be surprised if Disney doesn't decide to capitalize on this and make it an actual game. Because it's actually pretty fun to see them kind of like connect over this board game where they have their feuds, they have their bickering, but they also have their little eccentricities, where it does feel like, a family unit where like they kind of get together, but they also have their mild fights, which kind of reveal a little bit more about them, as well as their insecurities as it goes along. Now, all that being said, even though you have this great trifecta of characters here who work really well, you do get some cute moments with with Meridian. I like the way that she connects with her son, and how she kind of like looks on how she kind of like looks over to her husband, like kind of like at a distance, and kind of like realizes that there is a bond there that she kind of only has to she only kind of has to nudge there. It doesn't feel like she has to be like the mediator in all this, even though like like you hear that name and you kind of feel like, okay, she's kind of more of a natural leader here. She's a pilot, she's a mechanic, so you feel like she's gonna have to be the one to fix this relationship. But no, all she has to do is just give like a kind of a little bit of a kickstart and just say like, hey, go over there and talk to your dad, or just be with them, and that'll help everything. Not to mention she does have some pretty fun fight scenes with Callisto, the president of Avalonia, who joins them on this mission, who kind of sort of becomes the villain. She's voiced by Lucy Liu. She kind of becomes a little bit, not so much a villain as so much like an obstacle, like someone who needs convincing if they want to save the day, especially when they reveal the big twist when you get further into the film. Which, without going too much into it, I guess like the best way to describe the twist is, it's the most thrilling heart surgery you'll ever see in a Disney film. As weird as that sounds, but it makes sense when you get to the end of the film, especially if you there's a little bit of like Terry Pratchett in there by the end too. So it's weird for like the film. I think I feel like the film might set its expectations a little bit too high for some audiences. I feel like most audiences are going to be coming into this just expecting just a lot of dazzling visual sights and just kind of like more of like a classic Jules Verne style adventure, and they might not get that here. There is still a lot of like cool stuff. Like I loved all the fantastical creatures and the vibrant and colorful design of like this underground world. It's all pretty cool. But the more that it goes on, you realize that the best part of this film is definitely the family drama, which comes together really well. I mean, in addition between, having that, Ethan, this teenager who has like a same-sex relationship, and even with like, like his grandpa Jaeger, it's treated as just like, a part of growing up, so like this kind of like ease of like progressivism, which is perfect for this type of film. I kind of like it, and I feel like over time, like, because like at first, like the film didn't wow me, and I don't think it's like the best film that like Disney Animation has done, but the more I kept thinking about it, the more I kind of like the dynamic and the stuff that I didn't see within a lot of it. And I know I keep harping on this, but like the stable family unit, I feel is something that you don't see as. I mean, it feels like it's become more common. Like you kind of saw it in Lightyear, as with the supporting characters. But I like this kind of trend of having, a family come together that feels like a family, where it feels like the parents don't have to die so you can have the adventure, or it feels like the parent doesn't have to be the villain, or like the onus has to be on the kid to fix everything. So. And that's why I've kind of like almost kind of talked about this film saying like it's the perfect holiday film for like kind of like the Thanksgiving season for instilling this aspect of family. Kind of similar to like the similar sensation I kind of felt when I was watching like like Encanto and Coco, which do have that kind of like similar mindset of like addressing family problems. Except the differences between like, and I'm sure like there'll probably be some like relation to Encanto with how it's set up here, but I like the fact that that it's not just about like what's the right refer not quite like grief, but like kind of like just trauma that usually it comes like, because like we've seen this aspect of like family togetherness that is torn by trauma with stuff like Turning Red and Encanto, and here it just feels like irrational fears of repeating the same mistakes as your as your previous as your predecessor, and it's fascinating too, because like this is I think aside from like one small character, there isn't any death in this film, even like for like convenient deaths. Like at one point you feel like we find out that Jaeger has a wife, and with all the time that he spent away, like we think like, okay, well, like his wife probably died and this is probably gonna weigh heavy on him. But surprisingly, no, like his wife is actually still alive and she's kind of divorced him and moved on, which I found interesting, especially when like you get to the epilogue and you get to see Jaeger kind of like come to terms with his wife's divorce, and they still have like a fairly stable relationship. So like I said, all these aspects that I haven't really seen in Disney films, and I'm sure like if we get like more Disney animated films that explore these areas a little bit more complete with more fascinating stories, I'm sure Strange Worlds might just kind of be pushed to the wayside, saying like, okay, Strange World was like the stepping stone before we got to like like the more fascinating and more progressive type of like Disney animated films. But for the moment, as it stands right now, I think it's a fine film. It's definitely not in the same league as like Moana or Encanto, but it is a fun enough diversion. It's a Jules Verne style adventure that mostly works. It has some pretty gorgeous animation. It's got a little bit of the character design still have that kind of like stereotypical Disney animation style, especially with like the big bulbous noses that the Clades have. But in general, I think it's just like a standard adventure type film. I kind of feel about this film the same way I felt about Lightyear, where it's like the stakes are pretty easy to understand and the themes are not that grand. I mean, there's definitely like a big allegory in here about climate change and like like family relations, but it's fairly lightweight, and I say that only like comparatively when you compare it to like Pixar and Disney's other films that do have like headier themes that they tap into. Like it's no Inside Out or Soul, but for a very like kind of like simple popcorn blockbuster adventure, it mostly gets the job done, and it's actually pretty sweet.